This episode is brought to you by Disney Plus. For the Bell family, basketball is everything. But can they navigate the game of life together? Based on Kwame Alexander's critically acclaimed best-selling novel and narrated by Daveed Diggs, The Crossover. Streaming Wednesday, April 5th, only on Disney Plus. Visit DisneyPlusOriginals.Disney.com for more info. Must be 18 plus to subscribe. Copyright 2023 Disney and its related entities.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Welcome into another Friday, whatever you want to call this day of the week edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick here with you to wrap up the week and to wrap up the month of March. It is March 31st. Hard to believe, but time is flying. We're getting closer to the draft, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this podcast today. Before we get to all the draft stuff in the month of April, I want to have some fun today. We've talked a lot about this before the Bengals played the Chiefs in December and then back in January in the playoffs, and I want to revisit this again because I think it's a good time, and I'll say why it's a good time, but I want to revisit the Bengals-Chiefs rivalry, which has become one of the most exciting and interesting rivalries in the NFL. And really, before we kind of get into just the optics and the layout of this rivalry, I just really want to ask your all's take on this. I mean, when you think about a good NFL rivalry, what are the best components that make an NFL rivalry a really good, exciting rivalry to watch?
Well, I think in today's day and age I think it's more than just the NFL, but I think in today's day and age with free agency and how much player movement there is, you really need one or two or three or five, you need a small group of central figures that are going to be there for a long time, just because, I mean, you think back in the day where, you had Redskins, Cowboys. I mean, that was the preeminent rivalry in the NFL, and it was legitimate hatred. Like, those two teams hated each other because they would never play one another, or they would always play one another and they would never play for the other team. And now that's kind of different. I mean, Orlando Brown just signed here in Cincinnati. It's a different dynamic. So I think in today's day and age, you're obviously still going to have the historical ones, but you need 2, 3, however many you want to say, a small group of central people. It could be the coaches, it could be a lot of group of people, but you need a consistency on both ends, and you need them to play in high profile games. And I mean, we've kind of had that with the Bengals and the Chiefs here over these last couple of years.
Well, longevity, I think, is part of that too. 2 years of matchups, makes it kind of a, heated back and forth. But I mean, if they don't play again, I know they have the regular season matchup, but if they don't match up in the playoffs again for their 5 years or something, I mean, it's not much of a rivalry, right? So I think it needs longevity to have sort of any sort of staying power. You talk about the Colts in New England. That's kind of a perfect example. And, I know comparisons have been made to that with Manning and Brady, with Mahomes and Burrow. But, they faced off so many times in those high-profile games where it was over a number of years. It wasn't just twice and then never again. I think you need for it to happen quite a bit, for it to really resonate outside of the cities, too. I think that's something that's important, that it just can't, it can't be in your city that there's a rivalry. If for a real rivalry, it goes beyond those borders.
So that makes me want to get into my next question, which is going into this specific Bengals-Chiefs rivalry. Where we are right now, March 31st, 2023, is Bengals-Chiefs the best rivalry in the NFL right now? Why or why not, gentlemen? What do you think?
No, I think always the divisional rivalries are going to take precedent, and I don't think it's, like I said, it's been established enough to even come close to being something of that magnitude. I still think the hatred is there for the, Browns here or Steelers more so than the Chiefs. I mean, I think you're keeping an eye on them for the postseason and things like that, but I think your natural rivalries are always going to be the most heated. And this, I don't think this comes close locally, and I don't think it comes close nationally to something that sort of resonates across the league.
Yeah, I think you can kind of look at this. I think Mike is right, because you can look at this in a couple of different ways. Like Mike said, I think, with the divisional rivalries, like it's hard to match the intensity of, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, or, Dallas, Philly. Like there are just things that you're just never going to get to match, because, those two teams are guaranteed to play each other twice a season. Now, the thing that I think could change this, though, is in 2021, obviously, the Bengals hosted the Chiefs, then they played at Arrowhead in the AFC title game. 2022, they hosted the Chiefs, then they played at Arrowhead in the AFC title game. 2023, the Chiefs are on the schedule. 2024, Chiefs are on the schedule. 2025, there's a to-be-determined AFC West opponent on the schedule for the Bengals. So, 2026, a to-be-determined AFC West opponent. 2027, the Chiefs are on the schedule. You can kind of map out a path here to where the Bengals and Chiefs are going to play each other at least once for, the majority of this decade, and that doesn't really count playoff games. So, I think the more apt comparison here is this the next Colts Patriots of kind of the mid 2000s, because, that was kind of the one where, they were not division rivals. It felt every year it was, hey, if the Colts can get the if the Colts can get the Patriots to play in Indy, they have a shot. But, the Patriots kind of own that for a while. So that's kind of what I think you're talking about. I don't think it's going to match the intensity of a divisional rival. I just don't know how it can.
Andrew, I want to hold on to your point about the Colts-Patriots matchup there for a second, because you're on to something. But, Mike, there's a point you made I want to ask you about. You said that in terms of hatred, the Bengals-Chiefs rivalry doesn't come close with the Browns locally, of course, obviously, but even beyond that, like, are you saying a rivalry is more based on, like, the hatred? Like, do the Bengals and Chiefs just not hate each other the way the Browns and Bengals do? Or are you thinking about it more from, like, a fan standpoint when you say hatred?
I think, from a fan standpoint, that there's a natural inclination to dislike somebody, which is a rivalry, right? I think that I don't necessarily feel that that's, how the fan base feels about the Chiefs versus those three teams in their division. I think you're going to mention the Browns, and people are not, they just naturally don't like that team. I don't think that that's there right now for the Chiefs, because the Bengals are also 3-1 against them. They lost the most recent game, but I just don't think it's, in those terms yet. And frankly, if there's one side of the rivalry that has more sort of to say about that, it's the Chiefs. Because the Bengals did all the talking last year, and I don't think the Chiefs really did much, leading up to that game. And Mahomes is kind of, stayed above it, and I just don't get a sense that it's in that sort of stratosphere.
Well, I'm trying to find a way to put this. So, but do you think after the AFC Championship, the most recent one, like, do you think that changed, though? Because obviously the Chiefs got the last laugh to wrap up the year. They just won the Super Bowl. The Bengals were in the Super Bowl the year before. Like, do you think maybe now the hatred is starting to pick up to where there is a potential area for debate there?
Not really. Like I said, I think it's got to be, the Bengals had won 3 straight. They had made the Super Bowl the previous year. I just don't think that, one loss is going to push it over something that, you have, 60 years of games to compare it to with, Pittsburgh or Cleveland, and things like that. So I just think there's no way to sort of replicate that over a 2-year span.
And before I get back to the point Andrew made about, specifically looking at this as like a Colts-Patriots-esque modern rivalry, lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, so I guess when you say longevity, how much longer do you have to see, and Andrew, I want your thoughts on this too, this kind of goes to your point, how long do the Bengals and Chiefs have to play each other before we can start talking about this, whether you want to call it a Brady Manning or a Colts-Patriots rivalry, how long do we need to get there? I know you laid out the timeline, Andrew, of like the Bengals' future AFC West opponents, but is it 2 more years? Is it 2 more playoff games? Like, how do you kind of determine the line for that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a set number. I kind of mentioned that, the Chiefs are on the schedule in 2023, and I think most people have kind of penciled that game or the game that the Chiefs are going to play against the Eagles as their season opener. That feels like the Thursday night kickoff to the season. And so I don't think it's necessarily the amount of games. I think it's the style of game. What happens if, one of these teams, I would, kind of looking at the roster construction and kind of what they have, I would kind of say that this feels not likely. But what happens if one of these teams kind of becomes a middling, mediocre team that can sneak in as the 7th seed, and you just get a bunch of 2-7 matchups? Like, you could play that every year. I just don't know the intensity is going to be there. You've got to play it in big time games, and that means Sunday night games and Monday night games and divisional playoff games where the winner hosts the AFC title. Like, you've got to play in big time games. So I don't think it's a number. I think it's kind of the moments that you play those games, because to me, I think if this rivalry is going to build up, it's not going to be, hey, they're going to have to play consistently, obviously, but it can't be, oh, they played every year. It has to be, hey, they played every year, and this was a great Monday night game that went down to the wire, and then the next time they played in the playoffs, the other team got them back. Like, it has to be games that matter.
Yeah, I think over a lot of years, I think for it to make a difference, a 10-year span where you're consistently making the playoffs. Otherwise, like Andrew said, it's just sort of, they become meaningless games. I think it helps that, your setup's right, because you have Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow likely going to be there for the foreseeable future, but it's going to take time. And especially the way the NFL built, it's not really built like that. Like the Rams just completely collapsed within 2 years of winning the Super Bowl. And they're probably not
one of the worst in North American sports.
And they're probably not even going to have many of the faces that were in that Super Bowl game. There's only a handful left. So I think it's really tough to sort of establish yourself like that, like the old Cowboys 49ers, where you're playing, for the better part of a decade. But I think that's what it takes to sort of resonate and be a real rivalry, not just sort of a, flash in the pan.
Flash in the pan, I like that. So, obviously, there's a big gap between like the divisional rivalries, and I agree with you, especially like we talk about the Battle of Ohio. I mean, that actually might be even more exciting, I think, next year, because Deshaun Watson's going to be there for a whole year. They tooled up their wide receiver room. They have a new defensive coordinator who won a Super Bowl with the Eagles, Jim Schwartz. So that's going to be exciting to watch too. And I definitely think you guys make a good point with that. But kind of looking, like, not focusing too much on the Chiefs, but obviously one of the other rivalries that comes up outside of, Bengals Chiefs is Bills Chiefs. I guess, like, if you're the Chiefs, who's like the tougher, or I guess even more exciting rivalry? Is it with the Bengals, or is it with Josh Allen and the Bills? Because they've had some pretty high profile matchups too, including what some people have called the greatest divisional playoff game ever that they played at Arrowhead last year.
I guess it's similar. Like, I don't see, I don't define any of them, either of those, as rivalries yet. Or, I think they are competing for the top spot in the AFC, but I don't necessarily think that makes them natural rivals. I think those 3 teams right now, because of their quarterbacks, are going to be linked, but I don't necessarily think that makes them necessarily like rivals in a traditional sense.
Yeah, and I think 2022 was kind of the year where people started to view the Chiefs as rivals in Cincinnati and vice versa. 2021, I don't think you really kind of got that sense. Teams can play in the regular season and then in the postseason, and everything's fine. Like, it's just, you had, an exciting comeback in Cincinnati in 2021. Bengals win that game. You had a great game in Arrowhead in the I guess technically it would be the 2022 AFC title game, where, the Bengals come back and win that game in overtime. That was a really fun game. But this year, to me, kind of put it on another on another level compared to the Bills, at least, just because, the Bills had that obviously great divisional game, but, both times these teams have played in the playoffs, it's for a game to go to the Super Bowl. They've gone to overtime. This year's game, it came down to, a last-second field goal with, again, a late penalty. Like there were just different things that played into it that I think, kind of make it a bigger rivalry. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not ready to, I think it's obviously premature to say, this is the next, Brady Manning, or this is the next Ravens Steelers or whatever. But I think this year kind of laid the groundwork to put it on that path.
Yeah, I think, that's a point that I think everyone can agree on. I think some people might say, oh, it is a rivalry. Some would say, like you, for example, it isn't. But I think we can all agree that, yeah, at the very least, like, this is the year where, like, unless things change and either roster is decimated, we're setting up for what could be potentially the next Brady Manning or somewhere in that tier. But when we come back, we're going to get a little trash talky with this because, of course, whether you want to call it a rivalry or not, there's been a lot of trash talk between these two teams. We're going to rank some of the best trash talk, why we think some is ranked higher than the others, and we're going to talk about next season's regular season game between these two teams when we come back right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast, and if you still don't know what Cincinnati Football Insider is, listen up. It's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the podcast and the reporters who cover the team. Here's how it works. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. And it's the inside scoop on what we're hearing. And we're giving you the inside word before it even hits social media. If you join Cincinnati Football Insider, you get to participate on the podcast, and you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of social media for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. So here's how you get on board. Text 513-940-4193 or go to cleveland.com/Bengals and click on the blue banner at the top of the page. It's a great time to join as we're covering the NFL Draft, OTAs, mini camps, and much more to come later this year. So give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text again the number 513-940-4193. All right, and thanks for staying with us on this rivalry edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast, talking about the Bengals, Chiefs, whether you want to call it a rivalry or not, the matchups between these two teams, if we're being specific. And of course, that comes with a lot of trash talk, which really the bulk of it came, before the December regular season game and the AFC Championship game, whether it was Justin Reed mixing up Hayden Hurst and T. Higgins and even Tyler Higbee, Travis Kelce calling out Cincinnati's mayor, Mike Hilton saying, see y'all at Burrowhead, Jamar Chase saying tuna in a can, talking about Justin Reed. I mean, you can go on and on. The neutral ticket sales, which maybe that wasn't specifically towards the Chiefs, but like there's a layer to it. So, you got a lot of different trash talk there. I guess for you guys, like when you think about all the trash talk from the Chiefs side, some of which I mentioned and some of which I didn't mention, some of the things that the Bengals have said, I guess, like, where do you kind of rank the best trash talk that, like, was exciting, I guess, maybe not just covering, but, like, just interesting to see from afar between these two sides?
Well, I thought, one of the funniest ones, the one that I enjoy. So I mean, my take on taunting is that I think it's hilarious, and as long as it's not like actively harming someone, I'm all for it. So like I thought the Jamar kind of throwing the money at L'Jarius Sneed and Justin Reed was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And I mean, after the fact, we were talking to him, and he said it was 100% worth it. I would do it again if I knew I wouldn't get kicked out because of it. I thought that was a pretty good one. Some of the other stuff, like the Chris Jones one, the Burrowhead, you hear the, Orlando Brown kind of talk about how much that mattered. I think you almost kind of have to look at it in retrospect, because during all of this, I mean, it's kind of crazy that you can look back and say, Willie Gay said nothing impressed him about the Bengals offense, and, kind of the things that go on because, everybody said, this doesn't bother us, this, that, and the other. But after the fact, you kind of start to get a better understanding of kind of what was said and what was going on. So, I think you saw that immediately after the game. You mentioned, Juan Thornhill smoking cigars and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind, and the one that just I thought was really good, was the Justin Reed, Jamar Chase thing, where Jamar was throwing the money at him, or pretending, I should say, to throw the money at him.
Yeah. When you say Chris Jones, are you talking about when he was at the podium before the AFC Championship?
Right.
And he said, "See all that Burrowhead." When he said that, that was a good one. Actually, I should have mentioned that. The way he just like said it and walked off with that look on his face was like, you just knew, like, he was like this villain ready to just go into hiding and come back out. And man, he was a villain in that game with the 2 big sacks he had. But Mike, what do you think? Like, does any of it kind of come to mind? Do you rank some of this trash talk over the other? Like, what do you think about all that?
I thought the most interesting one was the mayor, just because he had turned his own fan base against him, and that's not easy to do. That everybody was sort of angry at him for being stepping in it, and so that's kind of what I sort of the memory I'll take from that back and forth, because the player stuff, that was okay, but nothing I don't know, too crazy. But when you can when you're literally the mayor of a city that's going to the AFC Championship game and everyone hates you for being doing something stupid, I think that's pretty impressive.
I mean, yeah, it looked like everyone all over the political spectrum was just going after him, which was funny. But, I mean, in his defense, though, after Travis Kelce called him out on TV when he said, "Shut your mouth, you jabroni," which can't talk about that without mentioning that. I think it was F-Tab Purval, the mayor is his name. He took to Twitter and said, "All right, that was a good one. Good luck in KC." And then when Travis and his brother Jason on the Eagles did their New Heights podcast like a few weeks later, Jason was like, "Well, Travis, he apologized." And Travis was like, "Oh, okay. Respect then. You're not a jabroni." Or I guess he called him a jabroni, and then he called him a weenie on the podcast. And he said, "Okay, you're not a weenie anymore." But Travis Kelce, we could do a whole podcast on him. He's like one of the most entertaining, I think the most entertaining player in the NFL. But I don't know, though, the Burrowhead comment, I mean, like, where does that kind of rank, though? Because, I mean, Burrowhead was, like, a big talking point for the Bengals, like Mike Hilton, who was the first one to say it. And then the Chiefs, like, took it personal. I mean, Chris Jones took it personal. Willie Gay said that nothing impressed him about the Bengals offense, even though he wanted Jamar Chase's jersey for whatever reason. Ironic. Maybe former SEC guys. But, I mean, like, just how funny was that? Like, I honestly think, like, just the way Mike Hilton came up with it on the cuff, off the cuff, I mean, in Buffalo, I just thought that was good. Like, would you have thought of something like that? Like, if you were them?
I mean, would I have thought? I don't know.
I didn't even think about, like, Burrowhead. Like, that's like, that was so good, and I didn't think of it.
I think I don't think the way that I would kind of look at the comment Burrowhead is that it will be fodder for however long Joe Burrow is in the NFL and plays in Kansas City. Like I said, they're scheduled to play in Kansas City in 2023 and in 2024. There's a to be determined AFC West team in 2025 that's on the road. So, like, if they play, there's a shot they play 3 straight years of games in Arrowhead of these next 3 years. So I think the kind of lasting impact of that is not really going to be like, the comment about Burrow. It's just going to be how long that is going to last, how long that phrase is going to last, which I think, if you have a, kind of a phrase that has some staying power like that, that's pretty impressive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the thing is, like, I mean, let's say the Bengals do win that AFC Championship game, whether they win or lose the Super Bowl to the Eagles, like, Burrow's 2-0 at Arrowhead with both games in the playoffs, in the AFC Championship, to be specific. Like, I mean, of course, that would change if he were to lose there next year, in that regular season game, or if they play in the playoffs again at Arrowhead of all places. But, I mean, the Burrowhead comment would look pretty good on Mike Hilton like that. I mean, obviously backfired because the Chiefs got their revenge. But, I mean, if they win that game, Mike Hilton's looking around like, I told you. But speaking of that game next year, obviously the NFL schedule hasn't come out yet. It's going to be a good bit before we see it come out. But, with this game, I mean, I think people are looking at this Bengals-Chiefs game and saying, hey, that should be the opening Thursday night game. But then you have some people saying, oh, what about an Eagles Chiefs rematch? Like kind of like how the Broncos and Panthers, they both opened the season against each other the year after the Panthers lost to Peyton Manning in the Super Bowl. Like, I mean, it's not impossible. Could see it happen again. You know, that wasn't long ago. I mean, would you make this your season opener? You think Eagles, Chiefs will take precedence? And if that's the case, like, should the Bengals play them on Sunday night, Monday night? Where in the season do you think that game should fall? Middle of the year, late in the year? Like, what do you guys think?
I'm not a schedule maker. I mean, I think it would make sense.
Just guess.
To open the league, the league, you know, year with them would be fitting. Otherwise, I mean, I think you're talking about a high-profile matchup on a Sunday night. I think that would be the most, you know, where you get the most eyes on it. So that would be probably the you know, next best thing for the, you know, TV audiences.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you kind of look at the schedule, I mean, it's because it's, you know, Thursday night football, Sunday night football, and Monday night football are now all on different networks, right? You know, Thursdays on Prime Games, Sundays NBC, Mondays ESPN and ABC. So I think that there's going to be some kind of, you know, some kind of push-pull there because, you know, again, not only do the Chiefs have the Bengals and the Eagles on their schedule, I mean, they host the Bills. They host the Dolphins. Yeah. They obviously have their AFC West opponents. The Chargers played them in really fun games last year. Like they've got some fun games. So I don't think it necessarily like I wouldn't be surprised. I think the Super Bowl kind of made the that matchup against the Eagles a really interesting one to kind of kick the season off. Just especially kind of the way that game ended. But you know, with seemingly the league's insistence to try and make Thursday night games not complete and total crap. I think that you would kind of look at a Thursday night game maybe at some point because I mean when you have those three teams on your schedule, Cincinnati, Philly, and Buffalo. I mean, is CBS going to want part of that because CBS is probably going to have to push for, you know, I mean that feels like a Nance Romo game at 4:30, one of those games. Like,
oh yeah,
there's going to be some unique, and you know the Eagles have that Fox game because they're the road team. So you know, does Fox want their? So there's going to be a lot of you know a lot of people to feed at that table this year with the Chiefs. So I mean, frankly, like I think you could make a case for pretty much any single time slot in primetime. Thursday night, Sunday afternoon at 4:30. Sunday night, Monday night, like nothing that they play next year or no time slot that they play in next year would really surprise me.
Yeah, when you look at, I mean, Nance Romo makes sense because the regular season game last year in Cincinnati was a 425 kick, and that was a Nance Romo game. But then when they played in Cincinnati the year before that, the year the Bengals made the Super Bowl, that was I have to go back and look. I think that was actually, no, it was at 1 o'clock. It was a 1 o'clock game in Cincinnati. Which was a thriller. That was the game the Bengals clinched the AFC North. Yeah, a lot of cats to feed. A lot of cats to feed at the table, like you said. But, I mean, it's going to be a great game either way.
Wait,
Thursday,
a lot of cats to feed at the table?
I don't know. Cats, dogs, whatever. A lot of people to feed. You know, you never heard people say, like, oh, he's a cool cat. Like, maybe that's just my street lingo. Like, oh, that's my cat right there.
Nobody says that.
Nobody says that.
You never heard, bro, like... That's street lingo, bro. I mean, some places that's street lingo. Come on now. Like he's a cool cat. You never heard someone say, "Hey, that's a cool cat."
I mean, I've heard that,
yeah,
but
the
no one ever says a lot of cats to feed.
A lot of mouths to feed.
You know, it's kind of like fat cats. You never heard the term like fat cats? Like, oh, you got a bunch of fat cats like that are hungry. Like these are some fat cats. Fox, CBS. These dudes are like fat cats that are trying to get their revenue. Like that's what I mean. A lot of cats to feed.
That's not how that works. That's not how that phrase works.
Well, I just said that's how that works. I just made my own version of English, which is my high school English teacher, Mr. Dixon, probably is going to hear this and go off on me one day, but it's okay, Mr. Dixon. I still got an A in your class, so I was a good enough student, I think. Back to reality, though, just to kind of wrap up. So, I mean, again, like this is going to be a great call it a rivalry or not, it's going to be a great matchup. I think 2023, that game's going to be fun. Just to wrap up, a little more free agency talk, even though we're kind of out of the woods with free agency. The Bengals make another signing, one that Andrew is familiar with, Terrell Basham, defensive end. He's played with 4 different teams in the last 6 years, most recently the Tennessee Titans. Played with them last year, and he comes over to Cincinnati. This was just reported right before we got on the pod, so I guess that's pretty good timing. Andrew, I want to just jump to you. I mean, you covered this guy at Ohio, and now you're going to see him again 6 years later, I think, is how long it's been since you've covered him. I mean, what do you think? Is it good that the Bengals are adding this depth? Is there anything to take from this? And Mike, I know you were saying you wanted to see some edge rushers added in free agency. Do you think the Bengals made a right move with this? Either one of you guys want to go ahead and lay it out?
Well, I think the first thing with Terrell Basham is that, you know, he's obviously not going to come in and be a guy who is immediately an impact edge rusher. I mean, you're talking about a depth guy. You know, he had kind of a limited 2022 with Dallas and Tennessee. Before that, you know, he was pretty active on special teams in Dallas and New York. He put up a couple sacks a year. So I think, you know, you're talking about a guy who, you know, he's gonna be a special teams contributor in particular spots, and you know, you're talking about a guy who, you know, you hope you can get 3 sacks from, 4 sacks from, kind of coming off the bench, and I think that they needed to do something at pass rusher. I still think, you know, this really doesn't change anything. But, you know, I mean, if you can get kind of what he was in, you know, that 2021 season where he had 3.5 sacks, played a decent amount for the Cowboys, I think you're feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, this is not going to move the needle. I mean, you know, if you're looking for bargains, I'd try to find a veteran that like who's out there. Robert Quinn is a guy that's out there. Can you get him for a cheap amount to just rush the passer? I mean, that's something where I think he makes an impact. This is just to add depth and a body. Frank Clark's still out there. Those are the impact signings that I was kind of talking about. This is just sort of a bargain to sort of add some depth. I don't see much. I don't think this is what I was kind of talking about when I was talking about adding a pass rusher.
Yeah, I mean, no, obviously, I mean, he'll be the farthest thing from a starter, but it's just interesting because obviously we talked about it. Like, that is going to be something they should address, which is, you know, like Duke Tobin said, they need more juice at the pass rush. Gives them a little bit of juice, not quite the juice you're looking for, but maybe that changes with the draft. And that's what we're going to talk about all of next week and beyond. We're going to actually, finally, I know I said this yesterday, I lied. I said today we'd get into our mock drafts and stuff. We're going to get into that next week, talk about the best positional fits for the Bengals at edge rusher, tight end, you know, any position that we've talked about that the Bengals have to fill a need for in this year's draft. But we hope you had fun on this Friday edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. These kinds of podcasts are always my personal favorite, so glad you all joined us. Once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. See you next Monday. Enjoy the weekend and stay dry.